everyone, I'm Jessica Beck, the Milton Fine Curator of Art at the Andy Warhol Museum, and I'm going to be joined today by Franklin Sirmans, the director of the Pérez Art Museum Miami. And I've invited him today to talk with me about Jean Michel-Basquiat. And I'm doing these talks, Curator Insights, for a large-scale installation, a complete rotation of the fourth floor of the permanent collection at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, around the relationship between Warhol and Jean Michel-Basquiat. And the rotation will open June 7th, Warhol and Basquiat in Focus, works from the permanent collection. And so I invited Franklin to talk with me today about Basquiat's legacy. And so I'm just going to introduce him briefly. Franklin Sirmans is the director of the Pérez Art Museum Miami. He previously served as the department head and curator of contemporary art at LACMA. In 2014, he served as the artistic director of the Prospect New Orleans biannual exhibition P3 Notes for Now. From 2006 to 2010, he was the curator of modern and contemporary art at the Menil Collection in Houston. Sirmans has curated many exhibitions throughout his career, taught at MICA and Princeton, held positions at Dia Center for the Arts and Flash Art. But the reason I'm speaking with him today is for his longstanding interest, scholarship, and curatorial work in redefining and solidifying Jean Michel-Basquiat's place within the canon of art history. So thank you, and let's welcome Franklin. Okay, Franklin, hello. I'm Jessica Beck, and you are Franklin Sirmans, and I'm so happy to have your time today over Zoom and to have you participate in our Curator Insights online talks. And I wanted to invite you because I'm working on this large fourth floor reinstallation of the fourth floor of the permanent collections of the museum around Warhol and Basquiat. And I started this work over the summer, because we found ourselves in this really political climate. You have the COVID, this pandemic happening, and you also have this very public murder of George Floyd that, spread on all of our channels online, and images of and videos of. And so I started thinking about this mirror effect to what's happening in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic and also the death of Michael Stewart. So I started thinking, how can we talk about Warhol and Basquiat differently, and how can we look at their relationship and also Warhol's connection and relationship with race and his partnership and friendship with Basquiat. So you came to mind because of your longstanding, not only interest, but also commitment curatorially and through scholarship of sort of solidifying and then also redefining Basquiat's place in the art historical canon. You really have done that. So I wanted to first talk about your interest in Basquiat, I guess, at the beginning, and then get to this kind of connection with Warhol, because I think there's actually a lot of really fascinating connection between them. And I think there could be a different, almost more productive way to think about them together from Basquiat's perspective, actually. So first, I just wanted to start with, because I have this with Warhol, where I have this deep interest in Warhol as a subject, and it's kind of been like a long-standing thing for me. And I see that in you and how you speak about Basquiat, that when you have spoken about his work, that there's this deep interest. And when you've done interviews before, you've talked about this personal connection of him being part of your generation, and really kind of connecting to him also in a cultural way with like the rise of hip hop and this sort of movement that was happening in New York in the 80s. So I wanted to start with, what was your first encounter with him or the work, and how did that end up sort of spawning this like long-standing interest in him?
Thank you. So for me, the first reference point, and at least that is recognizable, because maybe I had been somewhere or something, like at an opening or something. I doubt it, but it's possible. But really was the magazine cover from the New York Times from 1985, February, New Art, New Money. That really was the first time. And I was in high school and probably saw the work live in person at Vrej Bogumian shortly after that. I don't think I saw the two shows at Mary Boone. I'm almost certain I didn't.
Yeah.
Of course I didn't. 84, 86. No, I didn't. So I would have definitely first seen the work of Rezbegumian.
Yeah. Okay. What's funny or what's interesting is we have in the collection a photograph of Warhol holding up this New York Times magazine with Basquiat on the cover of it, and it will be in a vitrine in this rotation and installation. And it's just interesting because it's like the kind of interesting, I think, a thing about Basquiat is that he quickly understood the role of media. Yeah. And for you to encounter him on the front page of the New York Times magazine is like this understanding of him at a young age of how important the public image really was. And you've talked about the sort of setup of that photograph as well for that.
Yeah, which plays into Warhol specifically and directly because of the great contrast, I think, between the way that he positioned himself on the Times, which was shot by, I'm forgetting the name, Lizzie Himmel, I think. But the way that he gets positioned in Interview magazine, which I'm forgetting the date, right? Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, where he's shot by James Van Der Zee, is a whole other thing. Whole other thing.
Yeah. What's interesting too of the Interview magazine interview is that it's Basquiat interviewing Henry Getzeler.
Yeah.
And so what was really great about that is, this idea with Basquiat too that's really fascinating to me is strategy is a word that I think of him with him. Yeah. And you talked about this idea with his graffiti, that it was very strategic, that he made his graffiti next to the galleries, that he made a very clear decision to be in the presence of the art galleries in New York. So, before Warhol and Bruno Bischofberger and Basquiat all formally meet, there's this informal meeting at a restaurant with Henry Getzeler and Warhol, where Basquiat approaches them at the restaurant to sell Warhol one of his art postcards. So I think with him, there's this real sense of ambition early on and strategy and wanting to get in front of people, like a real knowledge of that. And that I actually find this really interesting connection to Warhol, because Warhol also had that in the 50s of getting himself in front of people, sort of hounding them in a way with gifts of some kind, like art directors of magazines he would send flowers to and things. So I think that idea of early ambition and strategy is one of their connecting points.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And having a multi-dimensional approach to what is considered creativity and artistry.
Yeah.
There's a commercial aspect that they both embrace fully and wholeheartedly. It gets downplayed in certain circles as being outside of the frame of fine art, but that's what I love about those two, because they use those things so well.
Yeah, I think the other kind of connecting point for them, for me in this more general way, because I have some specific ideas too, is, the market value of their work and kind of the detrimental side of that. The show that you co-curated in 2005 of Basquiat was at the Brooklyn Museum, went to LACMA and went to the MFA Houston. You brought together more than 100 works of Basquiat's, and you brought many works from Europe that hadn't been seen in the US for the first time. So I find this kind of an interesting thing with Basquiat's legacy, is that so much of the work still remains in private hands or in European private hands or some collections, but there's almost this difficulty to see it all together. And something that museum goers don't know about is the financial responsibility of mounting these kinds of shows now. With Warhol, this is a huge problem, is trying to get the work. Donna DeSalvo did her retrospective at the Whitney in 2018, and that's because the Whitney had the means to pull something like that off. But it becomes, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that relationship with Basquiat's legacy. And I find it, from my perspective, I wish there was more opportunity to see this big scope of him in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, which is kind of why you get a show every 2 years in a different part of the world, right? Brazil, Sydney, the 2 Europe back to back, London, Paris.
Yeah.
It's It's crazy. And I mean, the dissemination system is a little bit different in that the museums really didn't get it initially.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this awful quote that
Oh,
Anne
yeah. Interesting.
made. I forget where it was, maybe Art News or something, where she just talks about completely missing the entire thing. Like, we didn't understand it. We missed that boat in
Oh,
relationship to collecting Basquiat. And that's kind of
yeah.
the story, right? The Whitney owns that incredible painting that ends up on the cover of the last show,
Yeah.
the Boston MFA show.
Yeah.
But they have that and like 2 drawings, unless they've gotten something more recent. MoMA, is showing that big Glen piece, which is a loan from somebody, I believe. They
Yeah.
never bought a painting. They had 2
Yeah.
works on paper.
Yeah. Interesting.
So the whole, like, the idea of being able to see it all in one place has been tempered.
Mm.
But of course, Dieter Buchart has made a good effort or career in
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. 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 He has a show at Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris, I think in a year,
Yeah,
2 years, in
2 years ago.
2022 with Warhol or he has another
Oh,
one coming with Warhol
oh,
and Basquiat and the collaborations.
really? Oh, they're gonna do
Yeah.
that? Wow.
Yeah.
I can't keep track.
Yeah.
I can't even
Which,
keep track. And Montreal's doing one.
oh,
Um,
really?
I'm
Okay.
not
Well,
sure. And I
this
know
is
there are
so,
collaborations in there too.
it's
Not a
so
lot.
interesting because, Warhol has this frenzy around him as well. And it's almost like, yeah, I guess it's just when you start to see like the conceptually, curatorially, when something is really great and when something really promotes the work and when something is also just about a bit of repetition. I think
Yep.
Warhol and Basquiat both have that, I guess.
Yep.
Which brings me to this idea. So you gave this really great talk at PAM a few years ago that I watched recently. And first of all, I just loved this talk because you you talk
Oh,
about so
thank you.
much of the work, but there's just so much interest that comes from you in it, like in a personal connection. And you have this ability to look at these different sides of Basquiat, from the musical influence on his career to the cultural perspective that's happening in the 80s. And the whole time you didn't reference Warhol. And someone at the very end in the audience asked, what about Andy Warhol? And you said this, thing that they had this mutually beneficial relationship, and that after Warhol died, Basquiat is quoted as saying how depressed he was actually after the sudden death of Warhol. But rightly so, you left him out of the talk because, there is this sense with Warhol that there is this idea that somehow he's going to overshadow, or the narrative is that he gave Basquiat the opportunity to shine. But truly, and what I'm trying to do with this reinstallation of the collection, and what I've started thinking about with a lot of the work, is that it's actually Basquiat who shows Warhol how to paint again in the 80s. And I think the difficulty for people to understand that is because people do not take Warhol's 80s paintings seriously. And there's this huge shift for him stylistically and scale, and he brings in personal references and allegorical references in a very similar way to, it's almost like he's taking notes from
Mhm.
Basquiat, literally in the studio, having his presence in the studio. It's like he reconnected with hand painting again, large scale painting again,
Mhm.
this hieroglyphic kind of messaging that comes across very clearly in a lot of Basquiat's thinking of language also is very new, I think, or not new,
Sure.
but like a shift for Warhol. And so I find that to be this really productive way to look at the two of them, that it's actually this young 21-year-old
Mhm.
aspiring huge superstar talent, a
Mhm.
major presence of a person, comes into Warhol's life and teaches Warhol to paint again.
Mhm. Wow.
Um, and I have these couple images that I wanted to show you, and
Mm.
we can talk about a couple of them, because I started to really think about, Shadra Lebovier's show, the Guggenheim show about the defacement, was so important. And it's just, and you've had a public conversation with her at Williams a few years ago about centered around this painting. And I started to think about a work in our collection that is a collaboration sculpture with Basquiat, Clemente, and Warhol, in which Warhol screen prints the Daily News article about Michael Stewart's
Oh,
death.
shoot, really?
Yeah. And so I started to think about that in relationship to Warhol's late religious works and the 10 punching bags. So I wanted to show you a number of these works to think about how the way in which, just gonna share this. So we have this piece in the collection called the 10 punching bags, and this is
Right.
around 1985, 1986. And it wasn't shown during Warhol's lifetime, according to our files at the museum. And it brings together so many connecting points with the two of them, right? Basquiat's interest in boxing shows up in a lot of his work. They pose for the Shafratzi Gallery opening, boxing together. But with Warhol in the 80s, there's this complete focus on religious imagery and Christ imagery. And if we think about the AIDS epidemic happening right at the heart of all of this, and this sort of moral focus around sin against people that were HIV positive, or and punishment. And when we think also of Michael Stewart's death, and we think of Basquiat's connecting point to it, this work sort of really opens up for me in different ways. And I just want to show you this particular detail. So you know the Defacement painting well. You have this black unarmed figure that is surrounded by these pig-faced police officers with batons. But that black figure shows up again, armed figure, on the 10 punching bags in this really fascinating way of the two of them coming together. And I personally, and I wanted to ask you this, haven't seen this armless figure in other Basquiat works other than in this collaboration of the 10 punching bags. But the other connecting point, so you know the Keith Haring, taken from the wall of Keith Haring's studio. This work is taken from the wall of Keith Haring's studio. But this is our collaboration sculpture that's at the museum. Warhol's working with these broken canvases at this point in the 80s. It's put together according to our previous archivist, Matt Warbekin. So it wasn't not fully assembled when we've you know, the way it was stored in the collection, it was not fully assembled. But the important parts on this work are this Beware of Dog canvas at the top, which for me would have been a reference to Warhol's race riot paintings in the 1960s. When you think of 63 of the images in Life magazine of dogs specifically being sent out on peaceful protesters. And then you have this Daily News artist could have been choked headline that's screen printed. And then there's this yarn, black yarn attached to it. So I think the interesting thing about this work too is that the colors come out in Defacement here. You have the pink and the blue. And one of the things that Warhol says in the diaries when he's talking about this event, the Michael Stewart event, which he talks about in the diaries, he says, oh, you know, that kid, Michael Stewart, had the Basquiat look. He had the dreads like Basquiat did. So I don't know if these yarn pieces attached here are some reference to that at all, but it just is a work that has not been shown outside of the museum before. And it really, for me, brings together these really fascinating political connecting points between Warhol and Basquiat, and punishment and public death and bodies in the 80s in peril. You have on Christ's face these wounds or sores, you could read as sarcoma marks that are prominent. You know, you have Basquiat's crown, you have the word judge, you have X marks on Christ's face. So I just wanted to raise that, and then also think of these larger Last Supper paintings that feel somewhat allegorical in their symbolism, and how we can think about Warhol learning from Basquiat this political language. And there's just one other, these large-scale physiological diagram paintings that Warhol's working on, and
I've never seen anything like that.
how closely connected that is to something like Back of the Neck, 1983. And how can we think too of these paintings in
Wow.
our collection as maybe underpaintings that were never finished with Basquiat? Is this perhaps an underpainting that Basquiat was meant to come in and paint over? Because we know that after the Schifrazzi, after the bad reviews of the Schifrazzi gallery, opening their collaboration show, there was a break between them. Basquiat stopped coming to the studio to paint. And so there is a sense that perhaps some of these paintings were left in the studio for Basquiat to come and paint on, but he never
Mhm.
did. So
Yep.
I can stop sharing my screen and come back to
Wow,
you.
that's
But
crazy.
those are just links that I'm bringing out. I'm hanging where, I'm installing. I don't have the Defacement painting. Obviously, it's not in our
What
collection.
what have the bags been shown in? You said they were not shown in their lifetimes?
I don't believe that it was shown during Warhol's lifetime. I don't think it was in the collaboration show between them in
Yeah,
85, I think
I
it
don't
is.
think so.
But it has traveled in different shows from the permanent collection at the museum, but it's never been situated within its full context of this Michael
Was
Stewart death.
was it in blackmail? No.
I don't think so. The
Okay.
punching bags, Warhol
Yeah.
punching bags? I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
You
I
mean
just
Thelma
wonder the
Golden's?
context because I don't know if Glenn had done his boxing bag by then, Ligon. And
Oh,
also, Danny Tisdale's work, which comes
yeah.
from Warhol,
Oh, yeah.
where he
Mhm.
multiplies what do you call it? The king beating.
Oh,
There's got to be a
no.
conversation around that somewhere. Maybe take a look at the book. I can't remember. Wow,
Yeah.
that was fascinating to see. That specter figure is wild.
Yeah. On the punching bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the
Wow.
two of them together. The other really fascinating point I think between the two of them is in 1968, Basquiat's 8 years old, playing on the streets, is hit by a car, rushed to the hospital, has his spleen removed, is in the hospital for weeks recovering, gets a copy of Gray's Anatomy from his mother. But the same summer in 1968, Warhol's in the hospital for his shooting, nearly dies,
Oh, that's the
spends
same
weeks.
year.
Yeah, it's the same. It's in months of weeks of
That's
each other.
crazy.
So it's interesting too for me just to think about the two of them and their connecting points to thinking about anatomy and the body and the figure and where that plays out in their work. Like Gray's Anatomy is hugely important to Basquiat with, from naming his band in Gray
Yeah.
to having these reoccurring references back to that book. And with Warhol and this 80s work, there is this resurgence of physiological diagram showing up a lot. Whether or not that's like
Wow.
the 80s AIDS epidemic idea of health and well-being in the body, or that's also another thing that he's being reminded of
Yeah.
from Basquiat.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I wanted to kind of get your reaction about some of this and just think about that it really is Basquiat that is teaching Warhol to paint again and how to engage politically and personally, I think, in a way that he was doing in the 60s at the very beginning in 1961. But
Yeah.
then he falls into giving the galleries and the directors and everyone what they want.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this really interesting moment where maybe he starts to think, well, how can I tap into this earlier way of painting, of hand painting? And so much of that late work wasn't shown during Warhol's
Yeah.
lifetime. And still to this day, museums have difficulty situating that work or paying any attention to it. So
It's so weird. That's amazing to see together. Oh my gosh.
yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I wanted to get your thoughts on like their relationship, what your thinking is on it, and then can we look at it in this radical way where we put Basquiat first, in their names, that it's not always Warhol and Basquiat, that actually Basquiat is the one, because you've said this, and if you do look at this moment for Warhol in the 80s, he's more of a celebrity than known as a
Yeah.
famous painter anymore, because he's gone full on into MTV connections, world
Yeah.
TV production, interview production, and the gallery Warhol, the big
Yeah.
painter Warhol, isn't as well known in New York. And
Yeah.
so So yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on their relationship, and even if it's a sort of critical, problematic perspective, or
No,
whatever.
I think that I think there's so much validity and truth to that. I mean,
Yeah.
the he I imagine it's okay to say that Warhol always understood that he was a bit of a sponge and that he surrounded himself with people that he admired or
Hmm.
intellectually admired in some fashion at all
Hmm.
times. That's part of
Hmm.
his thing.
Hmm.
And that at that moment, that yeah, that was an incredibly special connection because I think he knew how tapped in Basquiat was on not only a fashion level, music level, club level,
Hmm.
race level,
Hmm. Hmm.
politically. He was at the nexus of the actual physical living and doing of what
Hmm.
Warhol could be seen as a sort of maestro of at that time, which was to be the bridge to everything in terms of culture and production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a kind of interesting thing about the two of them. I find as another connecting point is this idea of being one foot in the social circle
Yeah.
of nightlife party scene, and then one foot in the studio, like at all times.
Yeah.
So it's like young Warhol in the 60s is literally creating a social scene at
Mhm.
at his studio, the factory, but he's always making work at the same time. And
Yeah.
it's like Basquiat is out at openings or clubs
Yeah.
circulating, but he's also in the studio until 5 a.m.,
Yeah.
throughout the night. So
Constant production.
yeah, it's like that is another sort of interesting balancing act between the two of them, I think.
Constant production and the fluidity between those worlds.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good
thinking
point.
of Basquiat in the Blondie video and
Mhm.
the ability to traverse these different worlds, and it's unbelievable. He's only 21 at that point, so you have to really think, okay, for somebody to be that age from Brooklyn and have spent time in Italy and this that they have to be quite special.
Yeah.
So he was, I think, definitely attracted to that in several ways.
Yeah. I'm wondering how your perspective on his work has maybe changed over the years, or has it changed at all? Because you had this early connecting point with him. You've done shows not just on his work, but inspired by his work.
Hmm.
And so I'm wondering how you feel about it now, like his legacy. We talked a bit about this overproduction almost of exhibitions, but then
Hmm.
while there's an overproduction, there's also a miss, I think, with getting a totality view or a deep dive totality view. So,
Well, there haven't been many proposals that come at it from the angle that you're coming at, which is necessary to further the you know our understanding of the work in context.
yeah.
So I feel like we get a little bit more of that here and there, and there really has not been a lot.
Hmm.
The celebration is there, the celebratory nature, no matter where you are,
Hmm.
has been there, but it overshadows the different focal points. That's how it feels to me. And then the market, of course, is its own thing, right? So that's taken on a whole other
Yeah.
dimension of the work.
Yeah.
And it's one that I find so confounding. Like there's a piece coming up in Hong Kong next month, that somebody's got one of those like 40 million estimates on or something. It'll probably be more,
Hmm.
but it's always the ones with no text. It's always the more, I mean, it's the market, but it
Yeah.
creates a perception that becomes bigger than reality. This
Yeah.
is what one of the things
Hmm.
that I tried to address in our conversation about Marisol in '62 and Life magazine. It's like you have an aura out the bat that is way bigger than the influence of a quote unquote painter.
Hmm.
Um, and so
Yeah.
that has further obfuscated our ability to see the work more clearly. even while we are afforded more occasions to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Because those
Mm-hmm.
occasions invariably just get put in as the whole smorgasbord with no criticality.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I don't know if I just feel like I learn more every time that I spend time with the work, and I feel like I feel like we haven't really parsed why certain works are better than others,
Mm-hmm.
and that'll come.
Mm-hmm.
It's
If
crazy that you
you,
have that collaborative piece that has never been seen.
yeah, it's
That's
been
crazy.
on view in the galleries before, and I'm
Okay.
putting it up in June, but we've never sent it out of the building, at least not
Wow.
yet. And
Wow.
because I don't think what I'm trying to do is fully situate it in
Yeah.
their partnership and relationship. And the other connecting point, I think, for me, especially with the 10 punching bags, is this spirituality conversation between Warhol and Basquiat. And spirituality, Catholicism for Warhol is
Yeah.
definitely a theme throughout his life and in the work. And he grew up Byzantine Catholic, and especially in the 80s, Christ images come up over and over and over again. He does a Last Supper commission that he's partners with in Milan with Alexander Yolas in 1984, but between 85 and 86, he takes these images of Christ and uses them in various different ways on these 10
Yeah.
punching bags, connected to bodybuilders. So there's a lot of like political use of Christ during this time in the 80s at the rise of the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
Also in 86, his partner John Gould dies of AIDS. In 84, he gets sick with pneumonia. And it's in the September of 1986 that John passes, and Basquiat knew John. They were connected to each other as well, and there are references in the diary. So it's
Wow.
really interesting to think about that personal connection for Warhol. But I'm wondering if there's anything, Basquiat's perspective with Catholicism or spirituality, or if that is a connecting point for him in his work.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, not being a quote unquote practicing, but it was the
Yeah.
backbone for so much of the work. And it was also one of the things that I think gave him a reason to make some of the most important works there are. And that was about figuring out who he was. And it was about knowing that he has, this background that is linked to something much bigger, not just to Christianity in America, but to specifically to West Africa, and thus his desire to actually physically be in that space, going
Yeah.
to Cote d'Ivoire, I think it was in 86.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave him a whole other field from which to work from. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't solely about the politics of, say, colonialism,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea that religion is part and parcel of how we treat each other and approach each other,
Mm-hmm.
and it as a tool. I mean, gosh, I feel like Francesco Polizzi might have written more specifically about this, because he owned a piece that is it called? I can't remember what it's called. I can figure it out. I think it's Natives and Settlers, but it's got this pink background and it's on this cross stretch canvas. And it's right around the time that you begin to see, I mean, Christianity almost is a stand-in for colonialism in some
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, because so much of Warhol's connection with Catholicism and the connection or tension between that and his homosexuality
Oh yeah.
comes out so much in the work for me as a connecting point around shame. The Catholic
Oh
Church has
yeah.
come out completely, against what's happening with AIDS
Yeah.
in an awful way in
Yeah.
the 80s. The government has turned its back on people that are dying from AIDS at this moment. So there's a lot of shame and connecting
Totally.
points for Warhol at that point too. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for,
Absolutely.
I really just wanted to get your insights on thinking
So
about this
amazing to see.
relationship. Yeah, and the work and how we can really situate Basquiat in front of Warhol at this point, and
I
that
can't wait to see it.
yeah, and that Basquiat is teaching Warhol to paint again and teaching him to paint in a way that's new for Warhol. And I think this is why people struggle with this 80s work, how to situate it, and why is he using all of these symbols? And I don't know. I think because it hasn't fully been packed into this 80s trajectory and this
Yep.
relationship with Basquiat that really takes bloom, between 83, 85, 84. It's that 85
Yeah.
moment that things really blossom between them.
Yeah. And it is weird, but I mean the suggestions from Bischofberger and Shafrazzi
Mhm.
maybe were not so misguided in retrospect, and
Oh,
had Warhol at heart um, even more so than I would have originally thought. Not just about product, but about reinvigorating a practice.
yeah, I think with Warhol, the moment, the way he talks about Basquiat coming into the studio, he's struck immediately by the pace at which Basquiat can
Oh
work.
yeah,
They have this meeting, Basquiat goes back to a studio and 2 hours later shows up with a portrait of the two of them. And I think Warhol at this point is somewhat overthinking his work. He's taking a lot of commissions, portrait commissions. He's going back to that place of like, tell me what to paint, I will paint it, instead of I'm going to self-generate some ideas that aren't commission based.
for
And
sure.
that's what happens in this 85, 86. It's all this work that was not commission based. And
Wow.
that's the work that is hard, the hardest, I think, for people to situate curatorially, because it comes out of these black and white advertisement paintings, which literally say things like sin no more, mark of the beast 666 on a hand, repent and sin no more. That's what the painting is. But
Wow.
so if you think of like all this work that's not showing at galleries and where it's coming from, you can think like, where is he getting this new style from? And I think that's what he was struck by with Basquiat, the confidence in
Definitely.
Basquiat's painting. And then what happens on the canvas is a dance between them with the steps, and it's like Basquiat
Yep.
is leading Warhol in that dance, but there's also a trust between the two of them, I think. I think yeah.
Wow.
So that I just wanted to bring that to
I love it.
you and see what you thought about it and maybe change your mind about Warhol and Basquiat
I
together, and
can't wait to see it.
and that you having all of the scholarship around Basquiat, seeing fully that it is Basquiat that is the one leading this partnership between the
But
two
it
of them.
takes
And
those things. It
what
takes those kind of things, those juxtapositions in that context you're providing.
yeah, and this is what we do, right, as
Yeah.
curators, and you show people new ways to look at the work. So that's what this is all about. So um,
Bravo.
well, thank you, Franklin, for your time, and stay well and safe. And
Thank you. You too. And I'm going to
we're
send you
gonna
this like in a minute.